right, everybody. So as you know, I'm a residential real estate agent. I also help people with light commercial properties. And my talk today is not necessarily going to be about real estate specifically. It's going to be more general about business and even more specifically about productivity within your businesses. And in case anybody was wanting to hear stuff about real estate, I'll just give a quick overview of what's going on right now. It's still a great market for buyers and sellers. Interest rates are up. Prices are in New Jersey, prices are pretty level or even still increasing in certain pockets. It's not crashing like you're hearing in a lot of other areas. So that's the snapshot. If anybody has any particular questions about real estate, feel free to reach out to me. So the talk is going to be it's really centered about a book called The One Thing, which is written by Gary Keller and Jay Papasanjic. Gary Keller of Keller Williams, he's the founder of the company. And it's a productivity book. I would recommend this book to anybody that's watching this. It's not a real estate book at all. He doesn't even talk about real estate. It's about focusing on what matters. It helps you just figure out what things you need to do, what things you need to concentrate your efforts on so that you can grow your business. One of the concepts he talks about, the book boils down to really one central question. What's the one thing that I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or unnecessary? Once you know that, you focus your efforts there where they'll have the highest and best impact, and then it helps you avoid throwing good resources after bad. And well, when you're focusing on the things that matter, it helps you keep your sanity because you're not focusing on the things that don't matter. One of the concepts in the book, if you've ever heard of this thing I thought was fantastic. It's the 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. If any of you want to hear about it, definitely just Google either one of those phrases. You'll find all kinds of stuff that has to do with it. But really what it boils down to is that 80% of outputs are the result of 20% of inputs. And it's quite universal. Here's a few examples. I highlighted some of the ones that were most poignant to me. 80% of retail sales are produced by 20% of store brands. So knowing that, if I was in a retail store, I would want to focus what the 80% of my retail sales are and focus on those sales to generate higher sales. 80% of sales come from 20% of clients. So find out who the 20% of those clients are and service them with the most amount of attention. I like this one. 80% of complaints are filed by 20% of customers. When I used to work in the corporate world, there were always clients who just were complete time wasters. And I always wish that the company would just fire those clients. And now as an independent contractor, I have the ability to do that. And it absolutely saves me so much time that I don't need to be spending. 20% of people in your life consume 80% of your time. That could be good or bad, depending on who those people are. 20% of your habits create 80% of your productivity. That's an important one. Figure out what those habits are, focus on them, and boost your productivity. 20% of the hours in your workday yield 80% of your productivity. So it's very universal. I don't know how accurate these are, but I've also heard claims that it happens in nature too. Like 80% of the mass of the stars are consumed by 20% of the stars. In sports, I heard that 80% of scoring is done by 20% of the players. So it's very universal. What it does is it helps you identify what works, it helps you get rid of what doesn't work, it helps you buy back your time, buy back your resources. I like this one. It helps you reallocate your costs. So this is another way you can apply it. For example, if 80% of your revenue comes from new business, figure out what it is that you're doing to generate that new business and focus there. For me, my new business is repeat and referral business. So one of the things that I like to do is, if I know 8% of my revenue comes from repeat business via 20% of my client base, then I like to figure out the ways that I can generate new business from the other 80% of my past clients. Because the people you've worked with in the past are the ones that they like you, they know you, they trust you, and they're the most ready to work with you again in the future. All right. So that brings us again to what's the focusing question is, what's the one thing that I can do such that by doing that everything else will be easier or unnecessary? All right. So how do you do it? Buy back your time. So in the book, in my business, one of the ways that real estate agents have to generate their business is by prospecting, cold calling, talking to clients, networking, things like that. The problem with that is that it's so easy to be distracted. For example, especially like if you're working at home, if I'm working and I know that I need to make 10 contacts in the next 2 hours, I have to build a bunker. If my wife is home that day, I have to tell her, listen, I'm working. I cannot be interrupted during this time. If I have cats, I need to make sure that my cats are not going to be coming over. I need to make sure that I have my drinks, whatever it is, take my bathroom break, and then get to work. All right. So build a bunker. Is the stronger you can build your bunker, the more you're going to be able to focus on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Realize that multitasking is a myth. Studies have shown that when you are trying to multitask, what you're really doing is task switching. And anytime you switch tasks, especially on high focus tasks, you really lose a lot of traction. If they've showed that for tasks that require a lot of focus, if you get distracted, it can take you up to 30 minutes to get back into the groove of where you were before the distraction actually occurred. So multitasking is actually a myth. It's not real. It's just task switching. Another one is the myth is that willpower is on will call. Sometimes people wait for inspiration or whatever it is that it's gonna motivate them to get to work. That doesn't always work. I mean, other studies have shown that you have the most amount of willpower in the morning and it wanes during the day so figure out when you are the most productive. Focus all of your highly productive tasks in that time. Like for me, I'm a morning person. So all of my revenue generating activities happen in the morning rather than at night, and especially not after lunch, because I am so unproductive after lunch. Some of the pitfalls. All right. So the paradox of choice. One of the things there's a book called Paradox of Choice, but I've never actually read it, but I know what the concept is. It basically states that the more choices that we have, the more diminished our satisfaction is with our choice. And I always like to think of the example of in the movie, My Cousin Vinny. He's sitting in at the diner in the South. It's when he's having grits for the first time. He looks at the menu and the menu says breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Those were his choices. All right. For me, when I sit down at a diner, I usually get three things when I'm at a diner. I get scrambled or an omelet, a Reuben sandwich, or a burger, because anytime I veer from those, I'm always like, I should have got the burger, and I'm not happy with my choice. But if there was only those three choices, I would have been just fine with it, right? Also, companies have learned this too. So sometimes you'll notice when companies have a product, they'll have three tiers of the product. They have the basic entry-level product, the mid-level product, and the high-end product. If you have 15 different choices, it's really hard to make one. This was a concept that Steve Jobs had put into play when he had come back to Apple the second time around. They had, I forget the exact number, they had like 100 and something, 150 or whatever it is products. First thing he did was get rid of all those products and narrowed it down to like 10 or something like that. He like completely chopped off all the products because he knew that if they focus on just a small amount of products that were getting them the most amount of revenue and reducing the paradox of choice amongst their customers, we all know what happened to Apple since then. So if you embrace the paradox of choice, you can let go of what doesn't matter. All right. So the 80-20 rule, paradox of choice, let the things that don't work fall by the wayside. Also, the sunk cost fallacy. It really is why you should abandon things that aren't working immediately. Projects, clients, tasks, things like that. If sometimes we have the tendency to say, well, I've been working on it for so long, I'm almost to the finish line. If I just get there, it'll make sense. But really what happens is if you continue down that path, you use up the time and resources that could be used elsewhere for something that's going to be way more productive. So sunk cost fallacy is something that I actually pay very much attention to. And an example is in my personal life. If I'm in like a book or a movie or something like that, and if I don't like it, I'm out. Like if I'm 2 chapters into a book and it's bad, I will not stick around. If I'm 15 minutes into a movie and it stinks, I'm out. There's no reason for me to continue because I know that I'm not enjoying it. Another thing that I had found recently was when it comes to reading, this is something that is kind of a sidebar. I read multiple books at the same time. I've been doing that for quite a long time, and I find that the way that I do that, because if I'm reading usually 3 books, I'm reading a productivity book of some sort, or personal growth development. I'm also reading a fiction book, and then some sort of like spiritual, a lot of like philosophy type stuff. And the reason why that has actually boosted the amount of reading is because I read for different purposes. Just like when you're watching TV, you watch TV for different purposes. You might want to watch an action movie. You might want to watch a drama. You might want to watch a comedy. The same thing is with books. So when I realized that I could read multiple books, if I wasn't in the mood to read my fiction book, I had my business book that I could focus on. Whereas if I was only reading one book, if I didn't feel like reading that book at the moment, I didn't do any reading at all. So I love that example. So if you're a reader, don't be afraid to read more than one book at once. So getting near the end, so I do have some time for Q&A, I think. In the book, these are some of my favorite quotes that I think about quite often. If you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them. So if you're looking at your 80-20, your Pareto principle, and you're like, well, I can't really get rid of that because blah, blah, blah. You're arguing for your limitations, so you get to keep the limitation that's holding you back. This one is huge. So if I find myself arguing with, getting in my own way, arguing for a limitation, I'm like, listen, I'm arguing with myself again. I need to stop doing that. I don't want to get rid of this task, but I need to. And if it's something that actually needs to happen, focus your efforts where you're going to be able to get the most amount of impact, and sometimes outsource things. Like, for example, for me, I hate doing accounting. I hate doing website stuff. I hate doing, the menial tasks. Those are all things that you can still make sure that get done, but outsource. I mean, there's people in this group who can help with IT stuff and accounting, things like that. So if it's a limitation that's holding you back, outsource it or get rid of it completely. And then just to piggyback on that, you can have reasons or results, but you can't have both. So you can have the reason why you haven't gotten to your revenue goal for that year, or the result by getting rid of those reasons, but you can't have both. I love that quote. It's one of the ones that I remember quite often. And that actually brings me to the end. Anybody have questions or comments on some of this stuff?